All right, and welcome back to WBCR 88.3 The Saint. I'm Justin Kenny as always, and with me today we have a very special guest. Somebody, if you are a fan of America's favorite Yellow family, you will be very excited to hear from is David Silverman. So David, thank you for being with us.
Hey, it's a real pleasure, Justin. Thank you. And hello, everybody.
So David, why don't you start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself? Like, who are you?
Okay, I'm David Silverman. I was born in Long Island, but by the time I was 3, we had moved to Silver Spring, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. My father, Joseph Silverman, was a professor in chemical engineering. He left Stony Brook and came to the University of Maryland in College Park. So that's what brought us to Maryland. I started drawing ever since I can remember, and I couldn't think of a good reason to stop. I certainly had a lot of encouragement because there were a lot of cartoons on TV that inspired me. Everything from the Warner Brothers cartoons to Rocky and Bullwinkle to the early days of Hanna-Barbera like Huckleberry Hound, Quick Draw McGraw, and Yogi Bear. Also, there was the Beanie and Cecil show, and of course, Woody Woodpecker, and the wonderful world of Disney. It's interesting to mention both Disney, Mr. Walt Disney, and Walter Lantz of Woody Woodpecker would always have things about, this is how we make cartoons, everybody. And I was like, really? By the time I was 5, I said, maybe I could do that for a living. The other things that inspired me, by the way, were comic strips, particularly Peanuts by Charles Schulz, of course, and of course Walt Kelly's Pogo, whom many of you may not know. I recommend looking him up. He inspired people like Calvin and Hobbes. Bill Watterson, big fan of Walt Kelly, and so was Jeff Smith and Bone and other cartoonists. Big inspiration. I didn't find out later that he was an ex-Disney animator, but that was later on understanding these things. Anyhow, these are things that inspired me. All the Mad Magazine cartoonists, everybody from Mort Drucker to Sergio Aragonés inspired. And one other big inspiration was the caricature work of Al Hirschfeld. So I recommend looking those people up if you don't know the names. Anyhow, all that mixed into my cartoonist brain, going all the way into University of Maryland, where I basically focused on art as I got rid of my general university requirements. And then I transferred to UCLA, to the animation workshop. And that's what brought me to Los Angeles. And that was back in 1977, and I stayed out here. And it's interesting when I think about it, just even saying that, from 1977 and then 1987 is when we started on The Simpsons. By we, I mean Wes Archer, Bill Kopp, and myself as animators on the Tracy Ullman Show in March of 1987. So at the time, it was a long distance between 77 and 87, but looking back on it, it's like, 10 years later, not bad.
Yeah.
So that's kind of I hope that gives you all a thumbnail description right there.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned how you kind of started in 77, but then you didn't come to The Simpsons with the Tracy Ullman Show until 87. And then obviously had a year or two there before it became God's backdoor pilot kind of with Fox.
Exactly.
But
So
what were
starting
you-
production in 80, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, starting in 89, in March, April 89, we started production as a series.
Yeah,
One more important thing. Most of you people don't see what's going on around here, but there's a room full of tubas behind me. I also play the tuba. Music and drawing musicians was a big factor in my early career as an artist and a working artist, because I started working for a company called Alfred Publishing after they saw my artwork in the Los Angeles Times, that I was doing work for the music critic at the time, a very prominent music critic at the time, Martin Bernheimer. So music played an instrumental role in my work as a cartoonist. I didn't mean the pun. I apologize.
no worries. So I kind of wanted to ask you, since like you brought up the period of 77 to 87. And obviously you started working, as you said, in 87 on The Simpsons.
Sure.
Before you worked on The Simpsons, because now everybody kind of knows you as like the Simpsons guy, what were you doing? What was your career like before The Simpsons?
Well, it's kind of started actually while I was at UCLA. I had a friend, Charles Solomon, who's a prominent art critic and writer, but we were just students back at UCLA at the time. He was already doing stringer critical reviews for the LA Times. I saw his work in the Daily Bruin newspaper. That was back in the day when they would look at, other college papers and see who was, a possible recruit into their journalism. And he got me in touch with Martin Bernheimer, who was looking for an artist who could draw musicians in a humorous fashion. I had done a caricature of the National Symphony Orchestra of Washington, D.C. before coming out to UCLA, a big giant 4x6 drawing. I don't know how I did it or how I could do it again, but that's what I did back then. That led to that. And so while I was working, while I was doing my animated films at UCLA, I was doing that. And that led to a company called Alfred Publishing, and that led to me illustrating their piano books. And also I had done a film called The Strange Case of Mr. Donnybrooke's Boredom, which won some prominent awards. And that kind of helped. Doing that film at UCLA was the equivalent of, showing my diploma. I mean, that film was my diploma, if you will. And I showed that and I was able to get impress people enough that they wanted to hire me. So after I left UCLA between 82 and 83, already doing some small amount of work, I worked for a while at a company called Laser Media. We did laser animation. Ooh, very exciting. Which some of it I think still exists, being projected on Stone Mountain out in Georgia. From there, I started working actually for Ruby Spears Animation, and on such animation delights as The Adventures of Mr. T and Turbo Teen, about a teenager who, of course, turns into a car. This is before people were taking these things ironically. The concept, ironic humor, was empty in Saturday morning cartoons. So we wanted to do things funny and ironic. Everybody I worked with, by the way, was extremely talented, and they all went to become prominent participants in the, shall we say, the silver age of Disney animation, sort of the revival of starting with Little Mermaid and so forth. But back then we were all toiling away doing idiot animation back in like 84. But then I had met this wonderful guy and talented guy, Bill Kopp, and he was directing the animation segments for Savage Steve Holland's two films, 80s comedies. One was called Better Off Dead. The other was called One Crazy Summer, both starring John Cusack and early in his career. And I was involved in the animation of One Crazy Summer. I had about 10 minutes of animation with its, live action hijinks with John Cusack, Demi Moore, and Bobcat Goldthwait. And one of the other animators that I met there and became friends with was Wes Archer. Wes Archer had worked for a small company called Klasky Chupo, a very small company at the time, doing mostly motion graphics. And they did occasional character animation commercials, I guess, and Wes had worked for them. And the Tracy Ullman Show got involved, with Matt Groening to do The Simpsons for the show, thanks to James L. Brooks. It's also another story. Jim and Matt had met as behest of Jim because Jim liked Matt's Life in Hell, and before the Tracy Ullman Show, they had met. Jim wanted to maybe do something with him. And then when he got the Tracy Ullman Show and they wanted him to produce a show with this new talent from England, he got the idea of making it, instead of a sitcom, making it a variety show, half-hour variety show, and have Matt's animation as interstitials. I think he might have been thinking sort of Monty Python-ish in a way. Yeah. It wasn't quite like that, but it was something, probably the thing that maybe inspired this notion. Matt, of course, he said, well, I can't animate it, so we'll have to, get a production company. That was Klasky Chupo, and they knew about Wes and asked Wes, do you know some animators? And he said yes, and he got myself and Bill Kopp involved, and that's how it all kind of came together. And in March of '87, actually, it was very interesting at the time. After working for a while, I wasn't sure if I was going to focus on animation or commercial art illustration, cartoon illustration. And I actually made a decision that year, beginning of '87, I think I'm just going to not take any work and just work on my style day in, day out. A very good friend of mine from UCLA, who's a phenomenal, now fine artist, but he started as an illustration artist, Gary Baseman, had done the very same thing, and he encouraged me to take that route, to just kind of work on your own style, like 9 to 5 every day for as long as it takes for you to go, aha, eureka, my style. So I put that on hold, and I said, well, I'll try this out. This might be fun for a couple of weeks. And that was in March of 1987, and it's lasted more than a couple of weeks.
I'm sure a lot of Americans, a lot of people around the world will be very happy about that. I also must add, I'm a big Klasky Chupo fan. But another thing that people, when they look back at the 1980s, especially with children's cartoons, and you brought up your work on a few of those Saturday morning cartoons. And so I just want to get your opinion on this notion that people tend to throw out about the 80s in cartoons. Is that a lot of the cartoons that came out in the 80s, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and other ones like that, were mostly there to just sell you toys, like G.I. Joe and stuff like that. Yep. Since you worked in that period, and honestly, obviously Klasky Chupo went on to become with like the Nicktoons in the 90s as part of that, which tried to rebel against that notion. But what was it like from an animator standpoint in that era?
Well, when I worked at Ruby Spears, it was a great collection of eccentrics. In fact, it was a group run by this wild guy named John Dorman, and apparently we were not in the main building. I didn't know anything about this. They were already sort of cloistered off to a bunch of bungalows at the top of Barham Pass. Because they were they're all talented, but too rambunctious for the main building. And they were all Jim Woodring was one of our gang, and Jim Woodring has had an excellent career working for Dark Horse with his very great cartoons, Tantalizing Tales, brilliant illustrator and brilliant cartoonist. But he had a bumper sticker, I poison your child's mind. That's essentially how we figured what we were doing. And from that perspective, at that, I'd say the midpoint, like, 84, 85, the animation landscape looked kind of bleak. Disney had come out with their Black Cauldron, which was a very big disappointment, both artistically and commercially. And it looked pretty rocky, as many out there might know, when Wells, Katzenberg, and Eisner came over and took over for Disney. One of their first thoughts was to get rid of the animation department altogether. Yeah. Sell it off for some dough and, like that, which was thwarted intelligently enough by Roy Disney Jr., Walt's nephew, who was the one who basically sort of saved that enterprise from disappearing from Disney, which was a great thing. I mean, none of us at the time realized it, but we were all kind of the young group that was part of the next wave of animations, succeeding. And three things happened. And the thing that really turned things around first and foremost, turned everything around, was Who Framed Roger Rabbit. That was an absolute thing that knocked people's socks off, just in terms artistically, humor-wise, and also financially. It was a giant success. And this came out in the summer of 1988, while we were doing The Simpsons. And actually, while there was a writer's strike going on. There was a writer's strike from March of '88 to, I think, the end of August of '88. So whilst we were sort of on hiatus from doing The Simpsons, this came out, and a lot of us thought that this is going to change things. There was already talk, I heard, of The Simpsons possibly being, Matt was certainly interested in being a series, and apparently I had helped in that regard, and I didn't realize it until later,
Yeah.
when I met Jim Brooks for the first time, and apparently as Jim would like to say, I had a few cups of courage down my throat, and I sort of loudly proclaimed, great to meet him, and how it would be great to do some adult animation, in prime time, like, something like the Flintstones or something like that. But apparently I had impressed him with my enthusiasm and, and shall we say, Mary Tyler Moore's spunk. So he told me later. Anyhow, but what was interesting, we couldn't see it because we were all like sort of young and eager to try to do something fun in animation, and animation looked like it was a faltering prospect
Yeah.
and financially. But I think the other thing too is that there were people of our age who are now like executives and so forth, and they had a fondness for animation, that the older executives were probably dismissive of. And I'm just sort of speculating here, but that has to have been part of the equation. But certainly the success of Who Framed Roger Rabbit made a giant difference. And whatever energy that they had, because Jim had been pitching to Barry Diller, the head of Fox, the idea of The Simpsons as a series, I'm sure the success of Who Framed Roger Rabbit gave it more energy, because there were a lot of shows that sort of became in development for primetime animation. And The Simpsons obviously down. But as my good friend Eric Goldberg, who's a great animator, particularly famous for doing the genie character for Aladdin, amongst many other things, he said there were three things that happened to animation. In 1988, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and November of '89, Little Mermaid came out, and in December, literally a month later, came the first Simpsons Christmas special, and he said that was it. That really put animation back in the spotlight. And it did. The success of all those things, particularly The Simpsons, really led to things like Nickelodeon doing, Rugrats and Doug and Ren and Stimpy. And and then that inspired, all sorts of things. Everything from, Rocco's Modern Life, and, et cetera, et cetera. You can list all the credits. Oh, I'm sorry, all the titles. List them.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird to think about Disney not having animation, because that's what they were built on to begin with. Walt Disney was an animator. And
and the whole company was built on animation, and that's all they made until till the 50s, really. And then Walt started to branch out into television, live action movies, and of course Disneyland. But it's literally the bulk of his career. He died tragically early, but because he died in like 65 or 66. Basically the bulk of his career in the studio was all about animation. And the idea of it not being that, obviously they would have missed out.
I mean, Disney also traded Al Michaels for what I'm trying to remember the character's name, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, just to get the rights back from Universal or something like that.
Yes, they were able to get, now they have it back. I love the fact that Oswald the Lucky Rabbit is a walk-around character at Disneyland. I think that's wonderful. Actually, speaking of my friend Eric Goldberg, he did a Oswald the Lucky Rabbit short recently, a kind of short for Disney Plus. So
nice.
My first.
It's also funny because Al Michaels tends to laugh at it whenever somebody brings it up to me. He goes just like, "I'm going to be a trivia question someday." It's just like he just loves it for some reason. He's the guy who's arguably the greatest play-by-play guy in history, up there with like maybe Howard Cosell or Brent Musburger. But he's sitting there going like, "Yeah, I'm going to be a trivia question being traded for a cartoon character."
That is pretty good. That's pretty good.
And I mean, like, you also bring up the age thing, which is kind of interesting to look at, because my generation, because I'm Gen Z, I'm only 26, and then I have two older sisters who I have younger siblings as well, but the sisters kind of play more into the story as well, who are millennials, because they're 7, 8 years older than me, and we pretty much all just grew up on animation and kind of sitcoms, but animations heavily. I'm from the generation that just quotes SpongeBob all the time, or like grew up thinking we were rebels by watching Family Guy. Or then you got my sister, my one sister, who literally after they were married at their wedding ceremony, you know how they have the song that you go down the aisle to?
Right.
She got married to Under the Sea.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, and for like my generation that comes before me, it's almost impossible to think of our childhoods without either A, like those old sitcoms, or B, especially animation.
Yeah.
And
No, this is a great thing because um, it was a kind of a gap. I mean, my parents, of course, are I'm baby boomer,
yeah,
and my parents are the World War II Depression generation. But my dad certainly loved animation. I mean, because he would talk. I would ask him about that because I would ask him about the Warner's cartoons in the theater. He said, "Oh yeah, they were the topic of it wasn't considered." The Warner's animation, from his perspective, were not looked as children's animation per se because they were basically in front of, you know, once upon a time before all the Warner's pictures, like a Humphrey
yeah,
Bogart picture and so forth. And yeah, and I would ask him about these cartoons that I revere, these Chuck Jones, particularly cartoons. And he said, "Oh yes, I remember when that came out, like when One Froggy Evening came out." He said, "I remembered that, and that was we thought it was a tremendous piece of film art, basically." So they
yeah,
had a different attitude. There was sort of like this sort of weird gap, starting in the '60s, where there was this weird notion of animation just being for kiddies that was kind of prevalent for about almost 20-ish years until
yeah,
we sort of broke the ice again with the Simpsons and every show that was inspired and followed us. So it's interesting, and by the way, hearing this is very gratifying, to know that.
yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, like everybody I know today is either watching at least one adult cartoon, or at least going back to another like cartoon from their childhood. I mean,
Well, yeah, it's the sort of thing I think about too, because in some ways, The Simpsons was literally at the right place at the right time to come out. And just
yeah,
people's sensibility of humor, taste, and what they're going to connect to. And we had a lot of things going in our favor. Matt's art style and the fact that we made them yellow was a really great um, accidental, wonderful thing that helped people connect with the show and enjoy the show just before
yeah,
anything being written, before anything comes out of their mouth. It's like, well, these characters are interesting looking. Let's check them out. What do you say, gang? And then the writing
yeah,
was just incredible. It was just sort of this combination of writers who were inspired by a whole litany of comedy at that point. Everything from what had been done in sitcoms and what you could parody in sitcoms to their experience writing for David Letterman or Saturday Night Live, or appreciation for the British humor of Python and
yeah,
other imports like that, kind of all mixed together with the sensibility of Mac Groening's. It's a TV family that watches TV, which was a great notion of this family would reflect popular culture and comment on it, or just be completely crazy surrealistic. Uh,
yeah,
so just everything, and then you had James L. Brooks's sensibility that really gave it an anchor of heart uh, that was so important. People ask me, I mean, everything I'm saying is when people ask me what's the reason for the longevity of the show, it's every reason that I'm listing here in some sort of alchemy that makes it work really well and connect with people.
yeah. And I mean, it's weird. A little quick little side note is that you never know kind of like what's going to become iconic until it happens. I mean, like the story goes for the Holy Grail, since we're up Monty Python, said they couldn't afford horses for some reason in the budget, so they started using the coconuts, and now everybody knows the click 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 noise from Monty Python for the horses. It's
Exactly. It was that again. People talk. I always often talk about that. Is that limitations of budget is often the key to creativity and inventiveness. So I think in some ways limitations help, particularly
yeah,
in humor. But
Yeah.
but in the Simpsons case, I've often pointed this out, and Georgie Pelusi was our color stylist, and she made them yellow. I suspect because Bart, Lisa, and Maggie don't have a hairline, so we need a color that works as a hair color and as a skin color, and yellow seemed to be the thing that worked, and Matt liked it, and that's the way we went. And I'm glad that Matt didn't give those characters hairlines. Worked out.
Another, yeah, I mean, there also is the theory that that it was there because it would help people like notice them faster when channel surfing.
Well, that was
I don't
Matt's.
know how.
That was yes. Well, no, absolutely. But and Matt made that comment after he saw them yellow. So it wasn't that was. It's sort of like that was when he said, "Oh, this will be great." As like you're saying, people clicking through channels and what the this looks
Yeah.
interesting.
Another question I have for you about another kind of caveat of Simpsons culture before, like, I kind of delve in a little bit more to the show and the movie, especially. But have you ever heard of Simpsons wave? It's kind of like this subgenre of music people have made out of The Simpsons. Have you heard of it?
I don't know, but maybe I have, and I didn't know it was called that. But do explain.
I don't really know if there's a good way to explain it. I'll have to send you a clip or two after. But so people kind of taken these like Simpsons episodes or whatever and just kind of play things over them, kind of like remixing them and everything. Became like this huge trend on YouTube for like a few years. And obviously some of them are better than others.
Certainly.
But there's a few good ones I still go back to every other year or so. I'll have every time or so. I'll have to, after this interview is done, probably later tonight or whatever, I'll have to send you a couple clips of them. And you have to let me know
That'd be awesome.
if you've actually seen Simpsons before.
I think that's amazing. I mean, that to me again is so fantastic about the show is that it just keeps it just reinvents itself in people's interest, fascination, and I think affection.
Yeah.
You don't get that sort of thing happening because people don't like the show. So
Yeah.
well, I have to tell you that I'm very happy with especially recently in the last few seasons. There's been some incredible episodes, and I can't say anything about the premiere episode coming up this year for the season 36, but it's fantastic. It is really one of the best shows I think we've done in a long time. It might go up there as a new classic. I mean, that's my personal humble opinion, but it's definitely funny.
Yeah.
It definitely looks great. It's beautifully animated, and it's very hilarious.
I will say this though, because I know a couple classic episodes like Steamed Hams, which everybody also loves to meme on the internet too. Everybody is so like happy that like Albany was mentioned in Steamed Hams. Is that upstate New York is such a weird bastion.
Oh yeah.
Where ever since like GE left and everything else, there's still GE. It's kind of, we take pride sometimes when people like make fun of our area. Like people call our area a piece of crap, we'll still be there laughing and saying like, yeah, it is, but it's still great. And there's many great things about the area.
I love Chalmers just saying, "Well, I'm from Utica," and I never heard of that expression. The idea that he's from Utica is great. I think that also speaks exactly, and I think I speak. Well, also I'm from Silver Spring, Maryland, and Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein, who were the showrunners of that time, are from the Maryland, D.C. area as well, like I am. Yeah. So is Charlie Smith. So we have a lot of East Coasters over on the show. Actually, it was funny. We had a great episode recently where Chalmers and Skinner are doing a road trip together to Cincinnati. And as they're driving by, they do pass a restaurant that is famous for their steamed hams. So we had a relatively recent reference back into.
Yeah, I also remember recently when you guys did the song going through with like all like the Nisku and the water like the water tower, like Nisku and everything. Everybody from this area was sharing that nonstop, even though it's supposed to make fun of the area. But everybody's like, "Oh my God, we're on the Simpsons!" And was just sharing it on Facebook and everything, and everybody just loved it.
We always say we make fun with affection, so
yeah.
it's never It's never mean-spirited. It's sort of smart aleck. We try to be more smart aleck than mean-spirited in these things. We hope
Yeah.
people appreciate and accept them on those terms.
So I want to bring this quickly over to the movie a little bit because I know you were the director. Um, there, because there are also a couple jokes. I want to start out with a couple of jokes since I can tell you're also a very humorful person, but you got to be also to work on The Simpsons. But there are a couple jokes that people like to point out with The Simpsons movie. One being, and I remember seeing this movie in theaters, so I remember seeing certain audience reactions to it. One being the beginning where Homer goes, like, why would be stupid enough to watch something in a theater we could easily watch on TV for free? The part where Bart is shooting Homer with the BB guns, and underneath you get things saying for like American Idol broadcasting or something like that. And I want to ask you about those two jokes. And afterwards, after your answer, I got a third one I want to ask you about because I remember the audience reaction when I was in there as a kid when I was like 12 years old when the movie came out. But
Well, the first thing I'll talk about the first joke. That was always in. I mean, many things were changed from the very first table read in July of 2005. There were substantial changes in the structure, especially the first act and so forth. A lot of things changes. The character of Cargill really changed. However, that opening joke was always in there, and that was always something we wanted to do right from the start, the very beginning. Essentially, hang a light on the fact, we get it, we know it, and also was sort of a challenge for us because we got to make sure this film has something worthwhile that people would say, oh yeah, I can see The Simpsons, but the film is really something of its own, and that was something was kind of like almost our own personal joke to the audience and also a gauntlet to ourselves that we better make this thing pretty awesome. And we were working very hard. We were worried the entire time through production. Al Jean put it well. He said, if I was under any more pressure, I'd turn into a diamond. It was just like we just thought, well, either the film's going to do very well or it'll sink the whole enterprise. We don't know which it's going to be. The other joke, I'm trying to remember it now. It had a chyron underneath it as Bart's doing that, and I'm trying now. Now you have to remind me, what does the chyron say? I can't remember now.
I remember it was something about like a show on Fox. Then said, "That's right, we're advertising in movies now."
Oh yes. Again, that was commenting on just the unbelievable. This something was going on Fox at the time, so that's almost sort of speaks to the moment that Fox was having these small little ads on The Simpsons as the show is in progress, and it kind of would drive us crazy. They show, we're watching the show, and then this ad chyron will show on, or maybe a little window will show up, like, watch so-and-so next. It's like, this is our show, man. Can't you can't you stop putting, putting ads up on the side of our building? It's like post no bills. So that was exactly, I remember that now. Yes, it was a comment, again, cultural reference, because not only on Fox, but just most of the major networks were doing that they were having little chyron ads on their actual broadcast episodes. And we thought, well, let's do the same thing in the movie. We'll just make a comment about that.
It's also because so many movies have kind of become commercials nowadays. Like everybody points out that I think it's the Transformers movie has like the most product placements out of any movie in history or something like that. It's like something.
Yeah. And by the way, isn't it funny that when Steven Spielberg was doing E.T., he couldn't get the rights to use M&Ms because that was his original idea, was to do M&Ms. And the fact that M&Ms would say, "Oh, well, we don't want to have any free advertising for our confectionaries in a Steven Spielberg movie," and so Reese's Pieces got the deal instead. But anyhow, product placement things have changed. All right, so leading to a third question now.
So the third one, and also the counter your other thing, was like how Quentin Tarantino refuses to put any product placements in his movies with Red Apple cigarettes and everything like that. But the third joke is, and I remember everybody getting up and sighing when this one went on the screen when I was in the theaters, is The to be continued in the middle of the movie. Why was that put there?
Just as a joke. Just to see, it was almost like we wanted to sort of see the audience reaction. I think we were being anthropologists. Just to
I
see what happened. Also, it was kind of a tip of the lid to Monty Python. If you
yeah,
remember the Holy Grail, like at one
yeah.
point, just randomly, they just said intermission. And they had intermission and this sort of dopey music, just sort of abruptly in the middle of nowhere. And then they just get back to it. And they sort of took it out to a point of like, okay, this is a joke. Wait a minute, this is actual intermission. And then, okay, back to the movie. So it was kind of a little nod, maybe, or inspired by that too. So I think it was just kind of, it just was to, just to screw with the audience.
Because I remember I was about 10 years old, I think it was, because it came out. Simpson movie came out what, 2010 or so? I was about
2007.
Oh, okay, so I was about nine. Um, so I was about 9 years old, and my dad took me to see Simpsons. Whether or not you're okay with that as a parent, that's I guess your decision. But I just remember sitting there in the theater, and then Homer goes on the ice,
Right,
shooting
right.
the heart rate breaks and everything. And all of a sudden it just fades to black. Everybody's going like, "Oh, what's going on?" And all of a sudden it comes up in white letters to be continued. Everybody starts standing up to like, "Oh!" And then all of a sudden, like, all of a sudden the words just immediately come up, and everybody's like, "Oh, okay." It just sits back down.
I haven't thought about that, I think, since the movie came out. But I remember seeing that with an audience too. And the audience actually, I don't know, they laughed. I think there was part groan and part laugh, as like some people got like, okay, they're just messing with us. So I guess it was partly again maybe it was also a bit of a Rorschach test. See how much you what level of understanding you got from this. Hey, it's the Simpsons. We're going to do silly things. So
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
I'm glad we did it. Well,
Another
the
thing.
other thing, by the way, you know what that does it? It makes it a experience of seeing it with a movie audience. That's a sort of joke
Yeah,
that works best with seeing the movie audience, especially when the film first comes out. So that's something kind of really, great. And I said, okay, here's something we can do in a movie theater. You know, that would, if effectively that joke works best in the theater audience, in a crowded theater audience. So,
yeah.
and that's kind of the idea. We said, here we're gonna give you a film, we're gonna give you a version of The Simpsons that you'd experience in the movie, and it'll be different than watching it at home.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's kind of just like recently notion with streaming has kind of become just like, why would I go watch a movie in the theaters when I can just watch it for free on the streaming service? But then I have some friends who have told me like there are certain movies that you have to go see in theaters, whether it be Oppenheimer or Godzilla minus one or some of these other movies or Joker have been some of these movies that people have come up to me and go like, no, you have to see this movie in theaters.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I totally agree that there are films that require the whole experience about being sitting down in a darkened room with zero distractions and feeling the presence of what the story unfolding is doing, to your emotions, which are far different than sitting at home where, oh, I'm going to go make a sandwich while I partly watch this movie. you know,
Yeah,
uh, so it's a much different experience. And comedy is that way too. I think, you go back to the older comedies. I mean, literally, the shorts of Laurel and Hardy were timed for a theater audience. And if you've ever seen those in a theater, they're hilarious because what it does is like, how are the characters on the screen seem to be reacting to our laughter because they
yeah,
were timed the idea, what you see is, oh, that's how come there's a long pause there? Because the audience was just hysterical. So that's how they were done, you know.
yeah. And I mean, I haven't seen them in person. I haven't seen them, but there is a movie theater down the road that does play stuff like that
Yeah.
every year, like Laurel and Hardy or old silent movies and old movies from the 70s and 80s. It's the whole entire movie series we have here in Schenectady,
Right.
which is amazing. Um, but we're coming close to the end. So
There's
I
so
have
much to talk about, isn't there?
it's one of the problems of being an interviewer and having such a short time frames that sometimes you have to do multiple interviews with certain people is to get what you want out of it or what you want to know. But the final two questions I have for you being number one, everybody likes to put the Simpsons golden era as the 90s, especially seasons 1 through 9. Why then did the Simpsons movie kind of come out after the golden era? And then number two, you obviously have a passion for tuba playing, as I can see from the tubas in your background and everything else. Talk to us a little about your love for tuba playing.
Well, the first question, I would think in some ways, at the time we were percolating the idea of the Simpsons movie, we're thinking, well, the Simpsons can't last forever. We were thinking, because we didn't know what the networks were going to do. We had a real thought that by the time the Simpsons movie came out that the show may be off the air. I think that was kind of the reason why, if you say, why did you wait, quote unquote, so long? The other reason is it's not like we have a B team to do the show and another team to do the movie. It's like the same people are doing it, and it was kind of crushing. We got more people involved, certainly a bigger animation staff and additional people. But even so, I would say at some point it was nearly all hands on deck on the movie. Everybody working on the show kind of shifted their attention to the movie, and it killed all of us. I mean, even the writing staff too, because the same people writing the show were working on the movie, and it was just like it was long hours all across the board. So those are probably two of the aspects. I mean, there were earlier thoughts. I think people famously remember that they probably read stories that Camp Krusty. I think Jim Brooks thought that might be an interesting idea. Could we expand this into a movie? And that was back in the middle 90s and so forth. But no, I'm very glad in some ways, not only that we waited as late as we did, but we waited for the technology of CG, of computer compositing and computer painting. Because some of the stuff we did in the movie, there's no way we could have done it in the 90s in terms of the technology and animation. We just would not have the resources to do things that we did in the middle 2000s. So that was a break in some respects. Now, as far as playing the tuba, well, I started in my last year. I've always been interested in music, and I just figured I had to play something, and I gravitated to the tuba because A, I like the sound, B, I like the versatility of it, and C, I thought it was kind of funny. I think you have to have a sense of humor to pick up any instrument that is as oversized as a tuba or a double bass or something like that, just because this is a colossal instrument. All I'm trying to be is an octave lower than a trombone, and the horn becomes enormous because you got to double the size every time you go down an octave. My passion for playing the tuba led to Lisa becoming a musician. So it worked out. I was designing the opening title sequence, as probably many people know, working with Matt Groening and Sam Simon, and I was given in jokes for all the characters, except for Lisa. We didn't really have a joke for her, because her personality on the Tracy Ullman Show shorts is not very well defined. So in that meeting, which was my first really big meeting with everybody, I pitched the idea, well, maybe she's in the band and maybe she plays the tuba. And Jim Brooks said it this quickly. I do remember it. He said, well, I don't know about the tuba, but what if she played the baritone saxophone? In fact, what if she played it really well? That could be her character. She could be the genius kid of the family that nobody appreciates. Boom. Lisa had a personality. They started writing Moaning Lisa, I think that very day, or perhaps maybe next day. But that's where that episode kind of got inspired from that meeting. So I'm glad I picked up the tuba somewhere along the line in my life.
Well, that's definitely an amazing story.
Everything.
Everything's connected in some way or another, I guess. And
yeah, exactly.
I personally just got to say, before we end this thing, I personally just got to say thank you for also directing one of my favorite movies. I will say that. As the Simpsons movie has always been a movie I've always loved. It's one of my favorites. So I have to say thank you for that first off. But with that, we're pretty much out of time, and we have to end it here, sadly, because it's been a great time with you, David.
Oh,
And
thank you.
and you're welcome back anytime. And for everybody out there in Radio Land, this has been Justin Kenny, as always, with my guest, David Silverman. So, David, thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much, Justin. It's a pleasure to talk to you. We covered a lot of ground. It reminded me of a few things, and it was great talking with you and to your listening audience. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
All right, thank you.